In this video, I am going to help you to decide if Squarespace is the right website builder for you. I'm going to go over the pros and cons of Squarespace and compare it to WordPress and Webflow and all kinds of other stuff so that you can see if it's right for your goals. But you are not just going to learn from me. I sat down with expert web designer Christy Price as she shares everything that she has learned from building websites across different platforms.
Before I worked on Squarespace, I actually worked with WordPress. So I was a WordPress web designer, and WordPress is a great platform, and it's a great platform for a lot of people. And it can do things that, for example, if you are a food blogger, Squarespace is not for you. WordPress is where you need to be because there are specific plugins made for WordPress for food bloggers. And there are certain niches where a particular platform makes sense. But for many service-based industries, Squarespace is a great platform to get a site up at a much lower price point. As you mentioned, the price point for Squarespace websites comes in much lower than the same site developed on WordPress or Webflow because those require a lot more coding and a lot more plugins. They also require more maintenance after. So with Squarespace, not only can you get a website at a lower price point, but you don't have to pay someone to maintain it. So comparing it to WordPress, for example, WordPress is an open platform system. So you have tons of plugins that you're using on your website that everything is open source. People can access the code. So WordPress sites get hacked. And so you have to be on top of updating your site, updating your plugins every month. And I can't tell you how many WordPress sites I've cleaned up after they've been hacked. Knock on wood, I've not seen a Squarespace website hacked before. And that's because it's a closed source platform. So Squarespace is maintaining all the code. They're doing all those updates on the back end. So you as a consumer aren't having to do that on your own or pay a web designer for a maintenance plan to do that for you. So Squarespace is a great platform for anyone in a service industry, people who just want to do simple blogs, who are interested in growing their business through blogging. So I also hear Squarespace isn't great for SEO. Well, SEO has so many factors rolled into it, and most of those you can achieve on a Squarespace website. So Squarespace is not out of the game for blogging and for SEO in general. And I think one of the ideas around Squarespace that you mentioned is like, well, why would you hire someone to make a Squarespace website for you? Why wouldn't you just do it yourself? And
can I say one thing about that? Because it's so relevant to what you're about to say. So like, hold that thought. So as soon as going back to that story with the agency where I was like, hey, okay, you charge them $5,000 for people to do this. I was like, maybe I should learn how to do this. So they're like, yeah, like we have a Squarespace account. Go ahead, learn. It's so easy. Everyone told me how easy it was. I could not get a goddamn block to like move and add text. Like it was not easy. It was not straightforward for me. I didn't even realize there were insert points until like I had to look up some tutorials. And so it was actually a much steeper learning curve for me, like as somebody who's like tech savvy. And I realized, I need some help with this, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, tell me, going back to this question, why would you hire a designer? What's the reasoning behind that?
Right. And, Squarespace it's marketed as a DIY platform, and there are DIYers who have beautiful websites. But like you said, there is a learning curve with Squarespace. And a lot of people hire a designer for the reason that they just have more money than time. So maybe they want to just hand off the site to an expert, get it set up, and then most designers will actually do customized training for their clients. There are specific things that we know the client will be changing on the site, so we show them how to do that. And they don't have to learn the whole platform. They know how to do specific tasks that they'll need going forward. So having more money than time is one reason. Another reason is that there is so much more to a website than plugging in words and images. And this is where custom websites on Squarespace really shine, because if you hire a web designer, they're going to talk through with you in a strategy call. What's the purpose of your website? What are we trying to get people to do when they're here? And they build the site with that client journey in mind. So there's so much strategy about the path the person takes when they land on your website. The first thing that you want to do is let people know, are they in the right place? So when you go to a website and that H1 tag, that big text on the front says welcome, that is doing no one any favors. And if you're not a web designer, you may not know that. So having a web designer who knows where to put your keywords, how to create a page that keeps people moving down, how to create calls to action that take people on the path you want them to go through your site, and then to convert them from viewers to clients, that is pure gold. And that's something that can be challenging as a DIYer, even though Squarespace has some beautiful templates, free templates that you can play around with. And I would say if you're thinking about Squarespace, it's always great to set up an account and play around with it on your own and learn what you don't know. And like you said, you were playing around and it was pretty clear early on, I'm going to need some tutorials. I'm going to need some help. And so there are people whose brains work like that structure. They understand the flow chart of how a website will work. And so those people can DIY a website, no problem. They might get hung up on some of the technical aspects, but they can hire a web designer for an hour here or there for that. But other people who don't have that kind of strategic background in customer journey, it's really great for them to hand off the site to a professional from the beginning to set them up for success. And then with Squarespace, like I said before, the beautiful thing is you don't have to keep coming back to that web designer. So for example, if one of your offers changes, so perhaps you are a graphic designer and you're changing your package, you don't have to hire someone for $200-$300 to come in and update the text on your page. You can easily do that yourself. And you're not changing the flow of the site. You're not changing how people interact with it. You're just changing content. And that's so easy for people to do on Squarespace. And as a web designer, most of us don't love going in and changing text. That's not fun for us. The fun part is creating the customer journey, thinking about the strategy of the site, building a beautiful site that's easy to use. And so it's a thrill for us to be able to teach our clients how to maintain the site themselves and save them money in the long run.
Totally. And there's a bunch of things that you probably don't even know that you need to know, right? When it comes to a Squarespace website. Let's nerd out for a second. Let's just talk about some of these things. So you talked about a one-liner or the hero text when someone first lands on your page. It's like, how do you write that? Well, you need a formula for that. It's like who you help, where you help them, how you help them, and the benefit you bring, right? If you don't have somebody who's giving you a formula that's letting people know that you're in the right place, you're probably going to say something generic, right? Like helping people live their best lives, stuff that could be applied to a church or a nonprofit organization or to any other business. And so as a general rule, if your one-liner, that first sentence in the first 6 seconds that someone lands on your website doesn't clearly explain who you help, where you help them, how you help them, and the benefit you bring, then people are going to be confused and they're just going to click away, right? And then there's a myriad of other things that you didn't even know you needed. You know that little icon at the top of your tab that has a logo? Do you know what that's called? It's called a favicon, and you need to upload it, right? Should you put home in your navigation? Well, the answer is no. You should just be able to click on a logo, right? Should you have a button so people can schedule with you at the top right? Well, probably, depending on if that's your primary goal. And also, what is your primary goal? You need someone to help sort that through you. There's just what are the steps for your website? How does somebody do business with you? Have you broken it down into 3 steps? How do you display the stuff and the work that you've done? How do you use testimonials? Do you put them all on one page or do you put them throughout your site, right? These are all things that web designers have spent tons of time sorting through, learning, crafting to make sure that when you actually launch your website, that it's going to be your best foot forward. So I personally create Squarespace websites, which is how I first connected with you. You were so gracious to, meet up and talk and chat with me on like my journey and help me out there. And the thing I keep seeing over and over again is like, hey, if you're a small business owner, if you're a service-based business, if you are a solopreneur, you're gonna need something as agile for your business as you. You don't want to pay that monthly fee. You don't want to have to go to a developer to change the color of a button. You want to be able to do that stuff yourself. And you're telling us, hey, a Squarespace website is actually a great option for that. And can you help us, because you kind of hinted at this, but I just want to be crystal clear. Who is a Squarespace website not great for?
Yeah, so Squarespace websites are great for a lot of people. And this year, Squarespace, if you saw their Super Bowl ad, it's, their new tagline this year is everything to sell anything, something like that. So they're really leaning more into e-commerce. But I have to say, if you have a shop, so if your business is primarily e-commerce, today, Squarespace is probably not the best platform for you. I would look at Shopify. It was built from the ground up to support e-commerce businesses. Now, if you do a lot of things and selling a few items, a few products is part of that, Squarespace can be great. But for primary e-commerce businesses, I would say take a look at Shopify instead. It doesn't have the design flexibility that Squarespace has, but for e-commerce businesses, it has so much on the back end that makes your life easier. That's where I would start. And I mentioned food bloggers earlier. So there are certain niches like food blogging where you do need specific plugins that are built for WordPress. So you'll notice that all the successful food bloggers out there are using WordPress, and that's why. Squarespace is really great for informational websites. So if you have a brick and mortar business, so restaurants, it's great for. If you're a service-based industry, great for you. You mentioned that earlier. You can change your offerings really easily. So Squarespace is particularly wonderful for newer businesses because it is so easily flexible. And you mentioned this earlier. I'll just go back to that. You said, you don't want to hire a developer and spend hundreds of dollars to change something when your business changes. So perhaps you want to get started quickly. You have a Squarespace website, and maybe you do start with a DIY site. Later on, you can hire a developer to come, or a Squarespace designer to come and help you and make that site even better. You can add branding easily. So if you don't start with branding and you're just starting with information, start with that. Then you can add your branding later. So one question that I often get is, when should I launch my website? And that answer is today. Even if you don't have cash to pay a Squarespace designer, even if you are DIYing, if you're not sure about the customer journey, those are things that you're not sure about, but you need a presence, go ahead and create a website, because something is better than nothing, always. And Squarespace websites, not carved in stone. It's really easy to change them. So as you learn, or as your business pivots or grows, you can update those things really easily yourself on your website. So I always say, launch before you're ready. Whenever you have an idea for a business and you get going, you do want the legitimacy of a website. You want a place where you can send people so they can get more information about what you're offering, so that you're not having hours-long conversation with everyone who might be interested. You have a one point where you can send them to find out more about your business. So always launch before you're ready. And absolutely, if DIYing is what you need to do for now, do it. But I will say, going back to what you were mentioning about working with a designer, the designer will know objectively what is the correct way to set up a website. So there are lots of subjective things in web design, and those could be your font choices. But objectively, the web designer is going to understand how to create those fonts, to select fonts and create them in a specific hierarchy so that your website's readable. And there's a lot that goes into that. So, for instance, most designers don't use cursive fonts because they're really hard to read. And you mentioned the 6-second rule. So if someone can't figure out what you're offering in the first 6 seconds, they're gone. If someone is having trouble reading something, if it's taking them longer to read what you offer because it's a font that's just a little tricky, like, is that an A or an O? And they're spending time figuring it out, they're gone. So our job as web designers is to make your website as easy to digest as possible.
If you want to learn more about me or Christy or take any of my free Squarespace web design courses, you can find all of that stuff linked up in the description box below. Also in that description box, you can find the full episode of our podcast, the School of Content Podcast. If you want to learn more about me, Christy, or take any of my free Squarespace web design courses, you can find all of the links to learn more about that stuff in the description box below. If you want to hear the full conversation that I had with Christy, then you can find the link for If you want to learn more about me or Christy or take any of my Squarespace web design courses, you can find all of that stuff linked up in the description box below. Also, if you want to hear the full conversation of my sit down with Christy, then make sure that you check out the School of Content podcast that you can find wherever you get your podcast. If you have any questions about this stuff, feel free to leave me a comment and I will respond. All of my love, and I will see you on the next episode.